Hello everyone. I am currently sitting in my lazy boy recliner, my leg in a thick, stiff, and very uncomfortable cast. I suppose I can consider myself more than lucky to even be alive after the events that transpired a few weeks ago. I know most of you probably can't wrap your heads around the whole wendigo situation that I previously wrote to you about, but the story I'm about to tell you is one that will haunt me for the remainder of my life. I never knew about the darkness that existed in this world until I experienced the shit show that has transpired in the orchard. I realized that if you didn't believe the last story I wrote, then you definitely won't believe the next part. But someone has to know about the evil that lurks in the darkest crevices of the forest. Rob and I eventually recovered from our injuries following the battle in the orchard with the wendigos. I made it a point to drive my old rusty diesel truck down to the local butcher shop every Sunday evening to pick up all the leftover and undesirable cuts of meat. Jim Anderson would package it up and let me have it for free. I would then drive over to the orchard the following week and make the long drive up the bumpy and uneven path that led to Rob and I's old tree stand. I then would proceed to scatter the meat out onto the forest floor and make the trip home. Every night, just like clockwork, I would see our old pal Big Grim lumber out of the thick foliage of the park boundary and have a feast on the piles of fresh meat. It always brought the biggest smile to my face seeing him slowly recovering from the battle with the wendigos. His fur, slowly but surely, was growing back, sleek and shiny as ever. I always noticed that the gray around his muzzle was ever so slowly spreading, but to me, it made him look even more beautiful and majestic. It was hard to tell looking through a shitty, dark camera lens, but to me, it seemed his muscles were bulging even more than the first time I saw him. The meat was just a small gesture of appreciation to him for not only saving my life, but Rob's as well. Big Grim is truly a hero and a living legend in my eyes. Rob and I kept in touch every day almost. Some days just shooting the shit about random everyday things. But sometimes, we discussed what the King Wendigo warned us about. The creature that even his own kind was afraid of. It was clear to me and Rob that until the threat was neutralized, the orchard would never be a safe place to hunt and enjoy. To me though, I wanted the orchard to be free of whatever evil lurked there, because I wanted Big Grim to be safe, to live out his days in peace and solitude. The clear problem though, was that Rob and I had no idea what creature the Wendigo was referring to. We brainstormed and tried to think of any way possible to figure out what we were dealing with. One day, I was out in the pasture field spraying the thick patches of thistles that had taken over due to the lack of rain and drought conditions this summer, when my phone buzzed in my shirt pocket. I shut off the tractor and answered. "Hello?" Rob's voice exploded through the speaker, and I could tell he was excited about something. He said,
"Son, I have an idea. Meet me at my house tonight at 8.
I attempted to rack my brain and make sure I didn't have any plans that night. But before my mind could catch up, I blurted out, "Sounds good, Rob. See you then." I arrived at Rob's house shortly before 8, before parking my old truck around back and knocking on the door. After only 2 knocks, Rob's door opened slowly, and the blast from Rob's air-conditioned living room touched my face like a godsend. The humidity outside was terrible this year. Rob stood in the doorway in his usual attire, a plain white t-shirt, jean shorts, and a bright white pair of New Balance sneakers. Rob's face lit up, and he had a warm, comforting smile spread across his face.
"Hey there, son. Glad you could make it."
Rob and I walked straight over to his beer fridge, and I carried us a 6-pack over to the living room coffee table. We clanged the 2 bottles of Budweiser together, before a simultaneous hiss filled the living room from us popping the tops. We both took a long drink before sitting the bottles down. I looked up at Rob and asked, "What's up your sleeve, old man?" Rob stared off into space for a few seconds before sighing deeply and asking,
"Do you know the owner of the orchard land?"
I thought quietly for a moment before replying. Miss Jones? Rob smiled and said,
Yes, that's her.
Rob took another swig from his beer before asking,
Do you have her phone number and your contacts?
I pulled out my phone from my shirt pocket and scrolled through my mile-long list of phone numbers before finding it. Yes, sir. I've got it right here, I said. Rob opened the drawer to his nightstand and pulled out a pen and a piece of old notebook paper. I gave Rob the number before asking in a puzzled manner. Hey, Rob, shouldn't you have her number? You've been in this club 30 years longer than I have.
I guess, son. But ever since all those jokesters in the club accused me of shacking up with Miss Jones years ago, I had to delete her number and hide it from the wife, you know.
I spit out a mouthful of Budweiser I was sipping on before erupting in laughter. Damn, Rob. You're a regular Casanova, I said with a wink. Rob grumbled and said in a joking manner,
Shut the hell up. We have work to do.
Before winking at me. Rob then proceeded to tell me about his plan. He informed me that when our hunting club first acquired rights to the old orchard back in the 70s, the current owner, Miss Jones, was in the process of buying the property from a man named Tommy Williams. Rob had a hunch that Tommy, if he was still alive, may know what secrets the orchard holds. Rob drained the last sip of beer from his bottle before grumbling a bit and clearing his throat.
I'm going to give Miss Jones a call tomorrow morning and ask her if she has any contact information for Tommy or if she knows if he's still alive or not.
I thought for a moment, doing some math in my head before replying. Wait a minute. Wouldn't Tommy be extremely old by now? Rob sighed and thought for a moment before saying,
Oh, for sure, son. But he would be in his 90s, and there's a possibility that he could still be around. It's the best I can come up with unless you have something better in mind.
I put my head down and stared at Rob's old carpet floor before sighing. You got me there. Give it a shot. Rob and I exchanged goodbyes before I walked back out to my truck, swatting mosquitoes away that were buzzing around Rob's back porch light and making my way home. The next day, I was mowing the field of hay that was behind my barn, admiring the mountains and beautiful sky above when my phone buzzed. I killed the tractor engine and answered. Hey there, old man. Rob chuckled a bit before replying.
Look, I know you're busy, son, but I've got good news. Tommy is in the nursing home in the next town over. Miss Jones seems to think that his mind is sharp for the most part. He just has a lot of physical health issues. Would it be possible for you and I to ride over there tonight and see what he knows?
I smiled as my heart began beating a little faster before replying. Yes, sir. That sounds like a plan. Rob arrived at my house around 7:30 that evening in his '96 Ford looking shiny as ever. I jumped in the passenger seat and we sped down the road. I quietly thought to myself that this whole situation must be important to Rob, because normally he was one of those old guys that we normally yell at for driving 35 in a 55 zone. But tonight, Rob was in a hurry. Rob and I drove down the road admiring the beautiful sunset with its orange and pink colors, occasionally talking about the upcoming football season and the baseball playoffs. We arrived at the Piney Ridge retirement home around 8:30. I had a small hint of anxiety in my stomach because we were literally going to see a man that neither of us knew. And I'm sure if his family members were there, they would be extremely suspicious of us. Rob and I walked into the clean yet boring and plain building before Rob gave the office manager one of his warm and friendly smiles.
Hello, ma'am. We're here to see Mr. Williams.
She looked us up and down, narrowing her aging yet beautiful hazel eyes before replying. I haven't seen you two around here. Is Mr. Williams a relative of yours? I had no idea what to say. My tongue was tied. But thankfully, Rob, being the witty man he was, replied quickly.
Yes, ma'am. Tommy is my first cousin and this is my grandson.
She thought for a moment. I could tell she was highly skeptical. But after what felt like 10 minutes, she smiled weakly and said, "Right this way, fellas." She led us down a long, narrow hallway to the last room on the right, and she smiled politely before saying, 20 minutes, and it's bedtime for these folks. Rob nodded and motioned me in. The man lying on the hospital bed was a short, gray-bearded man that was living proof that Father Time was a son of a bitch. Tommy, although frail, skinny, and pale, had a full head of thick gray hair and a really cool handlebar mustache. The old man grunted as he saw Rob and I before weakly saying, "How can I help you, gentlemen?" Rob introduced us and told Tommy about our entire situation and the things that have transpired in the orchard. He told the story of the giant bear, the wendigos, and the mystery monster that apparently lived there. Tommy stayed silent and listened to Rob's every word. I was relieved that Rob did all the talking, because I was awkward in situations like this. I'm not gonna lie, I expected Tommy to laugh us out the building, but the more Rob spoke, the more terrified Tommy looked. His face crinkled in what I could only describe as fear. I could see the wheels turning in his aging mind. Rob finished and sat back in the hard and uncomfortable chair that the home provided. Tommy didn't speak for a while. Rob and I just put our heads down and waited. Tommy let out a raspy sigh before replying, "God damn. How long do those fucking things live?" Me and Rob's heads jerked up at the same time and looked at Tommy. Tommy pointed towards a glass of water on his nightstand, and I handed it to him. He drank 3 big gulps before handing it back to me and beginning. "Now, those skinny, nasty things with the deer skulls have been there since I was a boy. My father and I lived in a small cabin a few miles from the orchard, but my granddad passed the orchard down to my father and I when he died. My father and I spent all fall and winter in those woods, hunting, trapping, and just enjoying each other's company, until one day those things attacked us. We escaped, but we were terrified. One fall evening we loaded our rifles and went to end those things for good, until we were ambushed. 3 of them rushed us and started clawing our flesh to pieces." Tommy raised his shirt and showed us a huge scar running down his stomach. "Yeah, you see that? They almost gutted me, fellas. But..." Tommy trailed off for a moment before continuing. "This massive black bear saved us. He kept those things at bay until my father and I could escape. He was the biggest animal I ever laid eyes on." Rob had a smile curving at the edge of his lips.
Big Grim,
Rob said under his breath. Tommy looked at Rob with wide eyes and said, "Is that his name?" before chuckling and beginning a coughing spell. Rob smiled and said,
Yes, sir. That's what my friend and I call him. He saved us too.
Tommy shook his head and replied, "Damn, he must be supernatural or something." Before Rob could say anything, Tommy cut him off and continued, "Look, fellas, I'm glad you were able to get rid of those wendigo things, but please take my advice. Don't go back." I shot Rob a look before looking back at Tommy. "Have you two ever heard of the Dogman?" Rob and I sat in shocked silence for a moment before shaking our heads. Well, they resemble a giant wolf, but standing on 2 legs. Muscles like a bodybuilder and teeth. Holy fuck, those teeth. Tommy looked out his window into the darkness before continuing. "We saw 3 of them the last time me and my father went into the orchard. After that, We knew it was a damned and cursed place. We sold it not long after that. It broke my father's heart to sell it. But we knew we couldn't kill those things, and neither could that bear. My hands began sweating, and I felt my knees getting weak. Rob told Tommy about his invention, but the old man just shook his head and said, "That won't do you any good." Rob looked into the old man's eyes and asked,
Is there anything at all we can do to kill them?
Tommy looked at the floor for a moment, and then looked back at us before replying. Before we sold the orchard, I talked to my grandfather who lived out west in Colorado. Now, he swore that he had seen those things too, and he told me that without ripping their bodies to shreds, which no human could ever do, a silver bullet was the only way to kill, or at least badly injure them. Well, it just wasn't a risk that me and my father were willing to take. At this point, I should have been laughing in disbelief or brushing the man's words off, but with everything Rob and I had seen and been through, I wasn't surprised at all. Tommy gestured to the bottom drawer in his nightstand and asked me to open it. I did as he said, and in the bottom drawer, under an old handkerchief, was a bullet. A silver bullet. Tommy weakly said, "I've only got one, fellas, but you are more than welcome to it. There are 3 of those things in that forest, so one bullet won't save you. Don't go chasing them, please. You two seem like good men, and I don't want you to be killed and miss out on the rest of your lives." Tommy winked and said, "I wouldn't be here today at 95 if I had tried." Rob and I shook Tommy's hand and thanked him for his help. We went to leave, but before we closed his door, Tommy uttered one last thing to us. "He can't kill all of them." Rob and I drove back to my farm in silence. My mind was racing a mile a minute. I didn't know what to make of this. My hand slowly turned and flipped the bullet around in my pocket. Rob pulled into my driveway and looked at me with an oddly cold facial expression. All he said was,
This weekend?
I thought for a moment and replied, "Damn right." Rob looked at me and said,
3 o'clock, Saturday.
I watched Rob's taillights leap through the cloud of dust before heading to bed. The rest of the week went by as it always does. I baled the hay behind my yard, sold it to some horse customers down the road, fed the cattle, and did my farm chores. Saturday afternoon arrived, and Rob pulled into my driveway. His truck was shining like brand new, and I chuckled and said, "Damn, Rob, why did you wash your truck again? You know it's gonna get dirty again today." Rob winked and said,
It may be the last time I drive it, so I want it to look good.
I sighed and thought about the risks that we were taking. I looked in Rob's truck and saw the flamethrower with a fresh tank of propane, his 38 resting beside him in the truck. I went to the barn and fueled my four-wheeler up. I grabbed my shotgun and .44 Magnum and loaded it onto Rob's truck. I hopped in the passenger side, and before Rob could take off, I yelled, "Wait, Rob, who's using this fucking bullet?" Rob sighed and said,
Didn't you look at the caliber? It's for a .44. You'll have to do the honors, son.
My heart sank into my boots, and I began shaking. I stuck my hands down beside the truck seat to keep Rob from noticing, and I nodded. The trip over the mountain was full of Rob and I talking about Big Grim, talking about how we'd have to unleash a rain of bullets on those things. We knew this was beyond stupid, but if we could defeat these Dogman things, Big Grim would be safe, and the orchard would at last be the place we always wanted it to be. Rob parked his truck at the bottom of the mountain, and I climbed out looking up at the now graying sky. Goosebumps formed on my arms, and I thought to myself, of course it would fucking rain today. I began walking to the back of the pickup, but noticed Rob hadn't got out of the truck yet. I peeked inside the back window and saw Rob with his head down, mumbling a prayer to himself. I took one more look at the sky before making a cross symbol across my chest and taking a deep breath. Rob and I unloaded the four-wheeler, and I was pleasantly surprised at how Rob was moving today. The doctors had given him some new pain medication for his knees, and I could tell it was helping. I loaded my shotgun and .44 revolver, keeping the silver bullet in the pocket of my flannel shirt. I heard Rob clanging his bullets together as well, loading up his weapon. I turned around to see Rob standing there, stoic, yet serious. Rob stuck his hand out and I shook it. I was surprised at how tight the old man's grip was. Rob wasn't crying, but I could see his bright eyes becoming moist with tears. He cleared his throat and said,
"Thank you for being my friend all these years, son. It makes an old man feel young again."
I held back my emotions and gave Rob a hug before both of us mounted the four-wheeler and set off towards the tree stand. By the time we reached the top of the mountain, rain had begun to fall, soaking the leaves and pine needles on the forest floor. Rob and I looked around for a while before finally plopping down against the massive oak tree that we sat against the last time we were here. We sat in silence for a while, and I watched Rob out of the corner of my eye. He was taking in the world around him, almost like he knew this very well could be the end of us both. For a moment, I almost felt like getting back on my four-wheeler and driving the hell out of these woods. But then I remembered Big Grim and everything he had done for us. I closed my eyes and almost dozed off before I felt Rob's rough hand grab my wrist. I shot my eyes open immediately and looked into the thicket to our right. Once again, two red burning embers stood staring back at us. Big Grim slowly made his way out into the clearing, shaking his massive body, trying to disperse of all the leaves and foliage stuck to him. Rob and I gasped simultaneously as we gazed upon the massive bear. To anyone else, Big Grim looked like a monster, but to us, he was a friend and a hero. Big Grim locked his gaze on us and stopped just feet away from us. He looked 100 pounds heavier than the last time I saw him, and he looked as though he had been making gains at the local gym. It was almost like he knew he had one last battle to fight, and he was making sure that he was ready for it. Rob shakily stuck his right hand out and placed it on the bear's nose. Big Grim closed his eyes and allowed Rob to pet his head. Rob had the biggest smile on his face as I heard him whisper,
"Hey there, big fella. Glad to see you recovered."
Big Grim nodded his head, but when he opened his eyes, there was a look of concern, a look of worry. I can't really describe it, but I felt in my bones that Big Grim knew he couldn't beat what was still stalking these woods. He groaned and bellowed as he repeatedly pointed his snout towards the four-wheeler. Rob kept whispering over and over,
"No, we are doing this together."
The bear snorted and put his head down. I looked at Rob and was about to recommend we leave, but my words were cut off by two loud howls that literally shook my bones. The wind began whipping through the branches of the thick green summer foliage, and it felt like a tornado was barreling down on us. Big Grim immediately turned around and unleashed the most terrifying roar I've heard in my life. Rob and I stood frozen, staring at each other before another round of howls erupted. I swear, 500 wolves could howl at the same time, and it wouldn't compare to this. The wind picked up even more, blowing Big Grim's shiny black and silver fur around. Rob and I pulled out our guns and took our battle stances. From the ridge above, two massive creatures covered in gray fur emerged from almost the same spot that the wendigos did on that fateful day. They looked just like Tommy had described. Massive wolves standing on their hind legs, but their bodies were bulging and rippling with muscles. The taller one, which I'd guess was 8 feet tall, slowly walked towards us, saliva running out of the corners of its mouth. This one was female, I believe, because it had breasts remotely similar to a human female. Beautiful, but its wicked blue eyes locked onto us. The smaller one was gruff, fur-tattered, and sticking out in a messy fashion. This one was 6 to 7 feet tall, but it was built like the Incredible Hulk. Both beasts had large hands, not paws, but hands with long, sharp nails protruding out of each finger. The two creatures walked side by side, their gaze never leaving us. Big Grim snarled and stood on his hind legs, roaring into the sky as the Dogman howled towards the darkening sky. The smaller male Dogman rushed towards the bear, jumping into the air and attempting to strike Big Grim in the head, but just before the beast could land his blow, Big Grim drew his massive paw backwards and swatted the creature away like a fly. The Dogman flew across the forest floor, striking a large boulder to our left. The beast whimpered loudly, like a dog when its tail is slammed in the car. The larger Dogman growled and showed its razor-sharp teeth. Big Grim dropped to all fours and roared, his hot saliva splattering the Dogman in the muzzle. The two creatures took off towards each other, and when they collided, it sounded like a 10-car pileup. Big Grim stomped his massive foot onto the female Dogman's chest, attempting to pin it down and deliver a fatal blow. But the Dogman was fast, scratching and clawing at the bear's legs and chest so fast that it was a blur. Big Grim roared in anger and took a step back. The Dogman recovered and bit down hard on Big Grim's leg, causing blood and tissue to squirt out in all directions. Big Grim retracted his paw and drew back once again and knocked the towering beast sideways, the bear's blood splattering me and Rob. By this time, the smaller creature had recovered and it was charging towards the bear. This time, Rob and I were ready. We both pelted the creature, round after round with bullets. Clouds of smoke filled the forest as we unloaded every round. The creature barked and groaned as each bullet tore into its thick hide. Big Grim was still wrestling with the larger Dogman, neither creature seemingly getting the upper hand. Rob and I simultaneously ran out of ammo at the same time. I ran out of all my shotgun ammo, but luckily I had my .44 on my side. The smaller Dogman rushed towards Big Grim. At this point, the bear had the larger beast pinned down and was biting at its neck, attempting to rip its head from its body. But just before he did, the smaller one leaped onto the bear's back and began biting and gnawing at the thick flesh surrounding Big Grim's neck. The creature's massive arms bulged as it held on for dear life, as the bear shook and thrashed violently, trying to throw the creature off. Rob and I ran over to the battle and attempted to shoot the creature off of Big Grim's back, but we just couldn't get a clear shot. The two animals were moving around so much that any shot at all would risk hitting the bear's head and neck area. Panic set in, and I yelled at Rob, "What the hell do we do?" Rob glanced over to the larger creature and said,
Fuck this. Shoot that one.
Rob and I began pelting the Dogman with round after round, but to our horror, all it did was look at us and snarl. The creature had at least 12 holes in it, all oozing large amounts of dark, thick blood, but it just wouldn't die. Just then, Big Grim roared into the sky, reaching his massive paws behind his head, and grabbed the Dogman by the neck, tossing it over his head out in front of him. The creature slammed into the larger one, knocking them both across the forest floor like bowling pins. Big Grim was panting and snarling, staring at the two beasts writhing on the ground. He slowly walked over to the Dogman and planted his giant paw on the smaller one's chest before biting down and ripping its head off from its body, blood splattering all over his fur. He shook his head around violently and clawed the creature up until it was nothing more than a piece of roadkill. At this point, my mind finally cleared, and I remembered the silver bullet in my pocket. I pulled my .44 out of its holster and loaded it into the chamber. hearing it lock with a satisfying click. I walked over to the female dogman whose eyes began clouding over. I pointed the pistol between its eyes, and I pulled the trigger. The gunshot echoed across the forest like a freight train, and Rob and I collapsed beside one another. Rob looked at me and patted my shoulder before saying,
Damn, we make a pretty good team, son.
I laughed softly and said, I guess so, old man. By this point, Big Grim had blundered his way over to the larger dogman and proceeded to tear it apart as well. What would seem gruesome to some was nothing but awe-inspiring to me and Rob. Rob's medication had begun wearing off because as we stood up, Rob fumbled a bit and I had to support his weight. Big Grim finished his assault and turned to face us. His mouth and snout were covered in dark blood. I was about to congratulate the bear on yet another victory before my words were cut off in my throat by a deafening howl. The sound could be heard from miles around. Rob and I froze, wide-eyed and terrified. Big Grim froze as well, turning his head slightly to look up at the mountain. The forest was almost black by this point, and I fumbled in my pocket for my flashlight. Just above our old tree stand were two yellow burning eyes glaring daggers at us, slowly moving from side to side. I tried to focus, but my heart was thudding out of my chest by this point. I cursed loudly, beating my mag light against a nearby tree, attempting to ignite the bulb. Finally, the light flickered on, and what it landed on was something that nightmares are made of. Standing on a large boulder was another dogman. Not just any dogman though. This beast dwarfed the other two. It didn't have blue eyes like the others. This creature had the scariest yellow, soulless eyes. It snarled and howled repeatedly, looking at us with more hatred than I could ever imagined. The dogman's fur was gray, with patches of black mixed throughout its body. Its claws were twice as long as the others. The muscles were unbelievable. If I didn't know better, I would have sworn this creature took a bottle of steroids a day. Big Grim growled and snarled so loudly that Rob and I took a few steps backwards. Rob leaned in and whispered,
You used that silver bullet already, didn't you, son?
My heart sank as I realized how badly I fucked up. Now, Rob and I were going to die, and so was Big Grim. This dogman was the same height as the bear, but it had a lot more muscle. I put my head down and began to sob. Rob, I'm sorry, man, I muttered. Rob smiled at me and replied,
It's okay, son. We tried our best. Thank you for everything.
I looked up with tear-filled eyes as Big Grim and the dogman slowly walked towards one another, stopping inches apart. Big Grim stood on his hind legs, steam blowing out of his nose like an old coal-powered locomotive. The two locked eyes and stared each other down. Surprisingly, Big Grim was just as wide and damn near as muscular as this creature. I didn't notice this before, but seeing the two side by side, it gave me a small glimmer of hope. But then I remembered all of the battles that the bear had been through. My heart broke as I came to the realization that Big Grim was going to die. Not just die, but die protecting us. Rob and I were out of ammo, and I had used the only thing that could have saved us all. I held my flashlight out in front of me and shone it on the battle that was about to take place. The two beasts roared and howled one last time before the two clashed together. Big Grim locked his massive front legs against the dogman's arms, pushing him back into a tree. The dogman may have had more muscle, but Big Grim had the weight advantage. The bear rammed his shoulders over and over into the beast, attempting to get the upper hand. The dogman growled and swiped its hand against the bear's head. Big Grim drew back and returned the favor, but this time, the creature only staggered a tiny bit, unlike its family members. The Dogman jumped and rolled the bear onto his back, biting at the bear's chest. Big Grim's blood-red eyes glowed brighter than ever as he bit down on the Dogman's head, ripping its left ear off. The Dogman stood up and began barking and snarling, holding its hands against the hole where its ear used to be. Big Grim spit the ear out and got to his feet. The Dogman took off up the mountain in full sprint, with Big Grim in pursuit. I took a step forward, finding my courage, about to take chase, when I felt Rob grab my shoulder. I turned to him, and his eyes were full of tears. Rob said,
"Let it be, son. I can't chase after them, and I don't want you to die trying to save me."
My blood was boiling, and my courage was at a level that I never thought possible. I replied, "No, Rob. Fuck that. We've came too far to give up now. You stay here, and I'm gonna go help Big Grim finish this." Before Rob could reply, I jerked away from his grip and went charging up the mountain after the beast. My mag light's beam was dancing across the forest floor and bouncing from tree to tree as I trailed Big Grim. The only way I knew where he had gone was by the disturbed foliage. It looked like somebody had driven an army tank through the woods. I began sweating heavily under my clothes and panting, trying to keep pace with the giant bear and Dogman. Finally, I looked up and almost ran into the back of Big Grim, halting my run and sliding to a stop just inches from the bear's hindquarters. Big Grim didn't turn to face me or even acknowledge I was there. I could hear him sniffing the air and snarling, looking desperately for his adversary. I'd shone the light all around us, but I couldn't locate the Dogman. I looked down at my boots to find massive amounts of blood, all mixed in with the leaves and grass on the forest floor. Suddenly, without warning, a loud howl echoed all around us. I looked up in time to see the Dogman perched in a tree above us. Before I could think or say anything, the beast dove down from its perch and landed with a sickening crack on Big Grim's back. The Dogman sunk its long claws deep into the bear's back. Big Grim roared and bellowed from deep within as he waved his giant paws around, trying to knock the beast off. The Dogman was biting at the bear's hide so quickly, it was a complete blur of fur, blood, and teeth. His beautiful coat of fur was now stained in dark crimson. Blood was gushing out of him so fast that I didn't understand how he hadn't collapsed. Finally, with one hard blow, Big Grim landed a solid backhand to the Dogman's face, knocking the massive creature off of him. I felt something smack my cheek, and when I looked down to examine what it was, I realized it was one of the Dogman's fangs. I knelt down and picked it up and shoved it in the pocket of my jeans. Big Grim spun his heels and drew his paw back again, but before he could, the Dogman pounced and dove into the bear's knees, causing him to lose his balance and fall sideways. The Dogman jumped onto Big Grim's chest and began biting at his throat. Because unlike the bites from the other Dogman that seemingly were nothing more than mosquito bites to the bear, these blows were devastating. I never, in my life, imagined something being this ferocious. The Dogman raised its head and went for a final bite before Big Grim finally dug his claws into the beast's back, causing 10 small puncture wounds that began squirting dark blood from each one. Big Grim wrapped his massive arms around the Dogman and tossed him back over his head at least 15 feet. The Dogman barrel rolled across the ground before finally sliding to a halt against the dead locust tree. Big Grim looked at me, and I immediately knew he was hurt, and hurt badly. The bear had blood pouring out of his nostrils, mixing with the warm steam that came with every painstaking breath. I fell to my knees and almost began to sob. Big Grim closed his eyes and went limp. I was broken out of my somber state by the noise of the leaves crackling. Turning to my left, and shining my light, I saw the Dogman slowly limping towards me. It had a disgusting smug smile spread across its blood and dirt-soaked face. The creature was licking its lips and staring into my soul with those yellow, hell-filled eyes. I checked my pockets one last time, hoping to find one more bullet, but to no avail. My mind clicked, and I began sprinting up the mountain as fast as my tired legs would carry me. I ran until my lungs burned and my body threatened to collapse. I ran into the park, not concerning myself with having a firearm on my side in the government land. All I could think about was getting away from this monstrous hell beast. I was still sprinting until my mag light revealed a large drop-off in front of me. I locked my heels together and slid to a stop just inches away from falling over the edge. I looked down, and to my horror, all I saw was a straight canyon layered with sharp boulders all the way down. I closed my eyes and thought, this is the end of the road. I looked left. I looked right, trying to find a place to hide. Finally, I found a small cedar thicket off to the side of the cliff. I dove into it and curled up into a ball, doing my best to calm my breathing. My body shook, and I trembled as I listened intently for any sounds from the Dogman. No more rain, no more thunder, no twigs, no leaves, crickets, just nothing. I laid there for what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes. Just as I was feeling a calming sense of safety, the cedar bushes in front of me parted, and there he stood, the Dogman. My breath caught in my throat, and I stared into those yellow orbs once again. My flight or fight sense immediately took over me, and I made a run for it, but just as I cleared the thicket, I felt a large muscular hand grab my shirt collar and yank me backwards onto the ground. I cried out in pain as the Dogman's claws sunk deep into my neck, deep enough to scrape bone. The Dogman threw me on the ground and swatted me across the face, knocking the wind out of me. The beast limped towards me and grabbed my right leg in its overwhelming strong grip before twisting it and shattering my bones. I threw my head back onto the ground and covered my mouth to silence my screams. The Dogman made this weird, raspy wheezing sound, and I can only guess that it was laughing, taking pleasure in my misery. The creature picked me up by my shirt collar and hoisted me up like I weighed nothing, holding me face to face with it. I tried to turn my head away to keep myself from vomiting at the smell of this thing's foul breath. The Dogman then did something that I didn't think it was able to do. It spoke to me telepathically in my mind. It said,
"You pathetic little human. Do you really think that you and that old man and that fucking bear could kill us? You should have listened to Tommy. He left while he still could."
I looked at the Dogman in disbelief, trying to wrap my head around this. The beast continued,
"Yes, he escaped. But did he tell you that I killed his father? I sliced him up and devoured him, right in front of Tommy, and I took pleasure in every second of it."
My body trembled with intense anger as I listened to the creature's words. This thing was pure fucking evil, even worse than the wendigos.
"After I tear you apart, I will make sure to go back for that old man and that fucking teddy bear."
My blood boiled to a dangerous level, and before I could second guess myself, I drew back and punched the Dogman as hard as I could in its snout, causing it to bark and howl in anger. The beast dropped me, but I couldn't escape it, and by this point, my blood loss had made my head spin, and my leg was absolutely useless. The Dogman hissed and growled as it drew back to finish me off, but just like before, I calmly breathed and smiled to myself, knowing I fought for Rob and Big Grim. I did everything I could, but now my time was up. just before I felt the creature tear my body apart. The single loudest roar I've ever heard in my life boomed from down the mountain. The dogman froze and sniffed the air, looking in every direction. To this day, I don't know how Big Grim snuck up on us like that, with how massive he was. But the next thing I remember is a giant black mass running across in front of me, tackling the dogman. The two creatures became one as their feet and claws locked together. Big Grim drew back and swatted his paw across the creature's head, nearly knocking it unconscious. The dogman shook its head violently, attempting to shake off the haze. Big Grim jumped onto the dogman's chest and began clawing and ripping him apart, pieces of meat and fur splattering the trees around me. My body was hurt so badly, but my heart was happy as I watched my friend and hero dismantle this abomination. Just as I thought victory was near, the dogman opened up its hand and gouged its middle claw into Big Grim's eye socket. The bear recoiled and stumbled backwards, reaching and clawing at his face. The dogman had completely squashed Big Grim's right eye like a grape, and the bear disappeared into the night. No, 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 I screamed into the sky. How could this happen now? Shining my light back onto the dogman, I watched it slowly attempt to stand up. The creature was dying. I could tell because its once bright yellow eyes were turning a milky shade of white. Its jaw hung loose from its face, and blood was pouring out of its mouth and nose. The beast got to its knees and laid its upper body on a rock inches away from the cliff face. I assumed it was taking its last moments of life, but before I passed out, I heard growling and snarling to my left. Big Grim charged the dogman on all fours, colliding with the beast and sending them both tumbling over the cliff into the abyss. My mind spun in a whirlwind of heartbreak and confusion. Big Grim just sacrificed himself to save Rob and I. Flopping back onto the cool, damp ground, I drifted off, not knowing if I would awake. I woke up to rough hands around my shoulder blades, shaking me violently. My eyes fluttered open, and I saw Rob, pale and exhausted, but alive and well. Rob dumped his bottle of water he had in his pocket over my face and smiled as he realized I was still alive. Rob, with a trembling voice, said,
"Son, are you okay?"
I replied, "Yeah, I'm all right, old man. My face is even uglier now, and my leg is busted up." Rob let out a hearty laugh and hugged me so tight that I thought my chest would cave in. Big Grim flooded my mind, and I blurted out, "Rob, he killed it. He speared it right over the edge of the cliff." Rob smiled, but it was filled with sadness. I attempted to speak, but Rob cut me off.
"He's dead, son. But so is that fucking nightmare."
I began tearing up. "I'm sorry, Rob. I thought we were prepared, but we weren't prepared for this. I loved Big Grim just as much as you did, and I couldn't help him." Rob patted my shoulder and wiped a tear from his eye before replying,
"No, son. You helped him rid this place of all its demons and monsters. He loved you too. I promise you that."
I sniffled and cleared my throat. "He's a fucking hero, Rob." Rob nodded and helped me stand. I felt bad for the amount of weight I had to put on Rob just to walk, but the old man seemed in that moment like he was 30 years younger. Rob and I turned to walk down the mountain, but I stopped him and said, "Please, let me see him one last time." Rob sighed and said,
"Are you sure, son? It's not a pretty sight."
I nodded and limped over to the cliff edge, shining my light down to see the Dogman impaired on a sharp rock at the bottom. Its body was torn literally in half, but at the bottom under a pile of rubble with Big Grim. Blood and tissue glistened under the now clear moonlight sky. His body was torn up so badly it made my stomach sick. His legs and arms were twisted in ungodly angles, and this time I knew he was dead. Rob pulled my head into his shoulder, and I sobbed into his shirt sleeve. Rob and I finally made it back to the four-wheeler, and Rob drove us to the bottom. He loaded the four-wheeler up and drove us back home. After returning home, Rob took me straight to the hospital, where my face was stitched up and my leg underwent immediate surgery. A few weeks passed, family and friends occasionally stopping by to check up on me. Of course, I never told them the true story. I lied and said I fell climbing into my tree stand, and no one questioned it. Rob, on the other hand, stopped by every single day. And with the help of Rob and my best friend from high school, the farm stayed running smoothly until I was able to get around again. Last week, Rob stopped by, and after some small talk, he asked me,
"How about we drive over to the orchard and put some new batteries in that trail camera of yours?"
"Hell yeah, sounds good." Rob and I arrived at the orchard, and my excitement immediately turned to sorrow as the image of Big Grim's lifeless body filled my mind. Rob noticed my hesitation and reassuringly said,
"Come on, son. It's okay."
I nodded, and we drove up the mountain. I changed the batteries in my camera and looked around a while, recounting the events that had transpired just weeks before. Just as Rob and I could mount the four-wheeler to leave, a bone-chilling roar filled the forest around us. "There's no fucking way," I whispered to myself. Rob and I turned to see Big Grim limping towards us from the park boundary. Rob grabbed my forearm and held it tight. The bear was moving very slow, but all the wounds that were there a few weeks ago were slowly healing. The bear was blind in one eye, because all that remained was a cloudy blank eye socket. But other than that, he seemed to be doing okay. Rob and I stood still as statues as the bear approached. Big Grim groaned in an almost affectionate way as he stopped in front of us. My voice broke as I said, "How in the hell are you still alive, big fella?" The bear grunted and put his head down. Rob and I stroked the bear's fur, and at the same time said, Thank you. Big Grim nodded, and his giant head turned. Rob and I stood side by side and watched our friend return to his home. Just as he was almost out of sight, the bear stopped, rose onto his feet, and roared skyward before lumbering back into the park. I've been taking meat scraps over to the orchard for the past few weeks again, and every night I smile and see Big Grim making short work of them. That damn bear is unbelievable, and I'm proud to call him my friend. I'm at peace, and so is Rob, but there is this nagging feeling in my stomach, telling me that this fight may not be over. What else could possibly be in that damn orchard? Personally, I pray that this is over, but honestly I don't know. The one thing I do know is that heroes are real, and I have one as a friend. Long live the legend that is Big Grim. If you enjoyed this video, please don't forget to like and subscribe to Descent into the Unknown. If you have any cryptid encounters or paranormal encounters, or you're a horror writer wanting to share your stories on this channel, feel free to hit me up in my email in the description at any time.